There are days when a single careless word can make you explode. A cold glance makes you question your worth. A rejection keeps you awake at night. You ask yourself why they could hurt you so much, but the truth is, they didn't. You were the one who gave them that power, the power to touch a wound in you that hasn't yet healed. You cannot control the world, but you can control your response. That is the foundation of Stoic philosophy, where no one but you is responsible for your inner peace. When you stop living like someone being dragged by emotion, you begin to live as someone who deliberately chooses each response, each thought, each breath. No one makes you angry. They only reveal the part of you that is still untrained. And when you learn to observe instead of react, you not only protect your calm, you shape who you are. Now, let's step into 12 lessons that will help you never lose your peace, even in your most vulnerable moments. 1. Anger doesn't begin with others. It begins with you. It's not what they said that hurt you, nor is it what they did that made you angry. What truly set you on fire was something you once hoped they wouldn't do. Expectation is fertile ground for rage. You thought they would understand, that they'd keep their word, that they'd respect the boundaries you worked so hard to build. But when they didn't, you didn't just feel hurt. You felt betrayed, disrespected, dismissed. And anger rose up to cover something deeper. Your own disappointment for believing you could control what was never yours to control. I used to believe that if someone made me angry, it was their fault. They shouldn't act that way. They shouldn't break promises. They shouldn't hurt me. But one day, after a confrontation where I completely lost my temper, I realized I wasn't angry because they were wrong. I was angry because I couldn't accept that people will always act according to their nature, not my expectations. And that truth stung. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "When you are offended by someone's fault, ask yourself whether it has harmed your character." He didn't say anger was wrong. He simply pointed out that when you let anger lead, you allow someone else to write your character in that moment. Anger isn't an insult to who you are. It's a signal that you've been pulled away from your awareness, that some unchecked expectation is manipulating your emotions. And that's when you must take a step back. Pause and ask, what exactly am I angry about? Am I reacting to their action or to a deeper feeling of being threatened, dismissed, or abandoned? The answer often doesn't lie in the present, but in something unresolved from the past. When you have the courage to dig deeper, you'll see that your anger isn't irrational, it's just a signal. A flashing yellow light at the fork between instinct and awareness. You can react, or you can be conscious. One strips you of control, the other helps you grow. And the powerful truth is that choice always belongs to you. 2. Silence is an underrated power. In a world where everyone rushes to speak to prove they're right, the one who stays silent is often misunderstood as weak. But the truth is the opposite. Silence, when chosen deliberately, is a subtle, profound, and deeply unsettling form of strength. Because only when you're anchored within do you no longer need to perform without. I used to get caught in endless arguments where everyone tried to speak louder, faster, sharper. And I did too. I charged into verbal battles to avoid being outshouted, to avoid losing face, to feel like I was still in control. But every time, the only thing I truly won was exhaustion. No one won. And I realized words don't always bring clarity. Sometimes they only stir more dust. The first time I chose silence was when the person I loved most lashed out with harsh words. I would have snapped back immediately. But that day, I sat still, took a deep breath, and said nothing. Not because I had nothing to say, but because I refused to return the pain. In that moment, I saw clearly how the conflict was trying to pull me into its vortex, and I also saw another choice. The choice to remain grounded instead of being dragged. And I chose stillness. Silence isn't surrender. It's a declaration that you will not be blindly ruled by emotion. It's how you place space between an external trigger and your internal reaction so you don't end up regretting what can't be unsaid. It's time given for reason to step in, for the heart to soften, for the storm within you to begin dissolving. Seneca once warned, anger is the first thing that steals your clarity. When you burn with rage, your vision narrows, your words turn sharp and cruel, and the consequences linger far beyond the impulsive moment. But when you choose silence, you're refusing to play a game someone else set up with their rules, and they're bored. And then you'll see. Not every reaction is worth your energy. Not every insult deserves a reply. Sometimes your silence is the most powerful answer. It confuses them. It forces them to hear the echo of their own words. And most importantly, it keeps you centered, unmoved by the chaos trying to sway you. Today's world needs more people who know how to listen, not just how to speak. And if you can remain silent, not out of fear, but from understanding, you've touched a rare kind of power. A power that doesn't need to scream to be heard, because your silence already says everything. 3. Learn to smile when things don't go your way. There are mornings when you wake up knowing it'll be a tough day, a disappointing email, a message that never arrives, a meeting cancelled last minute. The world doesn't follow your schedule. Expectations collapse quietly, and you feel left behind in the rushing stream of life. In those moments, the first thing Stoicism taught me wasn't feel nothing, but feel everything. Just don't let it drive the car. Once, I was rejected from an opportunity I had spent weeks preparing for. I should have felt sad, angry, disappointed, but instead of resisting the truth, I smiled. A soft, brief smile, as if I'd just heard a poorly timed joke. Not because it was funny, but because I saw it clearly. This isn't the end. It's just a turn. And if I treat every misstep like a catastrophe, I turn my life into a never-ending battlefield. Smiling isn't denial. It's a recognition that you're still alive, still breathing, still sane enough not to be swallowed whole by what's happening. Smiling is how you tell yourself, I choose to see this from a higher place. It's not blind optimism. It's a conscious choice not to be the victim of every small collision in life. Nietzsche once said, man invented laughter because pain became too deep. The Stoics understood this too. They didn't smile because everything was fine. They smiled because they refused to let what wasn't fine bend their minds out of shape. In a smile lies freedom, a refusal to let ego be inflated by circumstance, a clarity that lets you see life as a larger picture where every setback, every rejection, every unexpected turn is part of a design still unfolding. You can clench your fists in anger or exhale and smile in awareness. A person who smiles through hardship isn't numb. They've simply trained their inner strength not to let short-term emotion dictate long-term direction. And that doesn't come from luck. It comes from habit, from pausing, breathing, and asking, what can I learn from this instead of fighting it? Because sometimes the most stoic response isn't logic or resistance. It's simply a well-timed smile. 4. Don't win the argument, but lose your life. Have you ever walked away from an argument feeling like you won? You spoke sharply, cited facts, even left the other person speechless. But when the echo fades, you don't feel relief, just a strange emptiness. It's not the peace of victory. It's the loneliness of someone who traded connection to protect their ego. And if you're honest, you know, you didn't really need that win. You just didn't want to lose. I once had a heated argument with a loved one over something trivial. I believed I was right, and so did they. Both of us defended our views, but neither truly listened. When dialogue becomes a duel, no matter who wins, the relationship loses. And I realized, sometimes the price of saying, "I told you so," is a fracture that can't be healed. Stoic philosophy taught me something vital. You don't need to win every clash. You just need to win over yourself, especially your instinct to dominate. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "You can silence a man, but you can't make him change his mind. So what's the point of silencing him?" That question is a mirror. It reflects the truth that often what we seek isn't truth, it's validation, and that's a dangerous temptation. Real victory isn't walking away with the last word. It's walking away with respect for yourself and the other. It's choosing to protect the relationship rather than asserting the ego. It's the maturity to know that a single silent pause can preserve a bond already on the verge of breaking. Not everyone deserves the energy it takes to prove a point, and not every situation needs to be understood right away. Wisdom lies in distinguishing what truly matters from what's just a temporary emotional clash. Because if you win the argument but lose trust, lose connection, lose yourself, was that really a win? Some things are worth keeping more than being right. Sometimes, stepping back is wisdom, not weakness, and there are arguments where the wisest move is not to play. You weren't born to be the most correct person in the room. You're here to become the most peaceful, awake version of yourself, and that no one can argue with. 5. Make calmness your personal sport. Some people spend hours each day training their bodies. They run, lift weights, count calories, and track every heartbeat. They understand that muscle isn't built by chance. It comes from discipline, repetition, and showing up even when they don't feel like it. But few apply that same principle to the mind. Staying calm under pressure is also a sport, but it's the sport of the soul. I used to think calm people were simply born that way, but that's not true. They weren't born with that trait. They trained it like an athlete trains each breath. Every time they get provoked and don't react, they win a round. Every time they could strike back but choose silence, they lift a new weight in awareness. And over time, that calm becomes strength quiet, but unshakable. Epictetus once said, "Whoever angers you, controls you." It sounds simple, but there's a profound warning behind it. If one look of contempt can enrage you, if a single harsh comment can rob you of sleep, then they don't need to do anything more. They've already won. They've occupied space in your mind without permission, and you handed them the key. So why not train the opposite? Make every day a training ground for your inner world. When someone cuts you off, says something absurd, or life doesn't go your way, instead of blowing up, treat it as a drill. You don't need to be perfect. You just need progress. Yesterday, you lost control after 3 minutes. Today, you held your calm for 1 minute longer. That's a win. You don't need a gym to train your mind. All it takes is your awareness in each small reaction. Staying calm in the face of injustice, in a noisy crowd, or when someone tries to provoke you, that's when you're lifting weights for your wisdom. No one sees it, no one claps, but you know, and that's enough. Because in the end, you're not here to react to everything. You're here to consciously choose the response that best reflects who you're becoming. And each time you choose calm over chaos, you're winning not over anyone else, but over yourself, day by day, quietly, powerfully, like an inner athlete stepping onto the field with no need for an audience. 6. Accept that others are not like you. One of the deepest sources of pain in relationships doesn't come from others doing wrong, it comes from them not living the way we expected. You expect your partner to understand you like in the movies. You think friends should always respond the way you do. You believe that if you live kindly, you'll receive the same in return, but life is much more complex. Because others are not you. I once stayed angry for days because someone didn't respond to my message the way I hoped. But then I realized I wasn't truly angry at them. I was angry because they didn't follow the script I had written in my mind. A script I never shared, never discussed, but still expected everyone to memorize. When I started observing myself, I saw clearly. I wasn't reacting to who they were, I was reacting to the version I created through my expectations. The Stoics understood that disappointment rarely comes because others are terrible. It comes because we demand the world to match our imagination. Seneca once reminded us, we suffer more from our imagination than from reality. Wisdom lies in acceptance, not because you're giving up, but because you're choosing freedom. Acceptance doesn't mean agreement. It's not turning a blind eye to harmful behavior. It's the act of releasing your need to control others. Because you can't make someone be kind if they're not ready. You can't force someone to love you the way you want. You can't make others grow at the pace of your inner journey. Everyone carries a unique context, value system, and wounds, and what seems obvious to you may be completely foreign to them. You don't have to become cold or indifferent to accept that others aren't like you. You just need a little less harshness, a little less need for everyone to mirror your ways, and a bit more observation, understanding, and stillness before judgment. I no longer demand perfection from others to feel at peace. I've learned to set clear boundaries, but also give people space to be different, to be lost, to be not ready. Because if you only love others when they meet your expectations, that's not love. That's a hidden transaction. And if your peace depends on the world acting how you want, then you'll forever be a hostage to expectation. It's a paradox. But only when you release the need to control do you begin to truly connect. Not with someone's ideal version, but with the real person full of contradiction, imperfection, and tenderness, just like you. 7. Not everything is about you. You send a message and get no reply. You say something, they sigh. You walk into a room and someone's eyes glance past without a smile. And suddenly your mind begins crafting a story. I must have done something wrong. Maybe they don't like me anymore. Maybe I'm not enough. Just a small sign or even silence is enough to sentence yourself with stories built from nothing but the growing anxiety inside you. I used to be that person. A cold look could spiral me for hours. A polite rejection made me feel worthless. But then I realized most of what I took personally had nothing to do with me. That person might be stressed about their family. They might be exhausted, distracted, or carrying a sorrow I know nothing about. And I, in the unconscious self-centeredness of ego, made it all about me. The Stoics call this a trap, the trap of personalizing everything. Epictetus said, "What others do is not about you, unless you choose to take it personally." Once you understand that, a door opens. You begin to see that most people don't act because of you, but because of themselves, their perspective, their fears, their wounds, and their beliefs. What you see is just the tip of the iceberg, the untold story beneath. Not everyone who interrupts you is disrespecting you. Not everyone who forgets to say congrats doesn't care. Not everyone who pulls away means you're unworthy. And even if they do, that still doesn't define you, unless you allow it to. You hold your dignity not by fighting for validation, but by refusing to carry others' emotions and motives as if they were absolute truths about you. When you pause and ask, "Is this really about me? Or am I reacting from an old fear?" you begin to reclaim your inner space where every reaction is chosen, not automatic. And then you'll witness something beautiful. You don't become colder, you become steadier. You don't need to know why they acted that way. You only need to know who you are, and not everyone gets the power to shake that. When you stop personalizing everything, you don't just protect your peace, you declare to the world, I am no longer a prisoner of others' perceptions. I am the guardian of my own self-worth. 8. Anger solves nothing but drains everything. Anger often arrives like an uninvited guest, knocking with injustice and stepping through the door of pain. At first, it makes you feel powerful. Your voice gets louder, your fists clench, your heart races like you're about to do something meaningful. But when the rush fades, all that's left is exhaustion. You didn't actually solve anything, you only made things messier, including yourself. I used to think that when I got angry, at least people would know I was serious, that I couldn't be disrespected. But what they felt wasn't seriousness, it was instability. Not clarity, but noise. And I realized, anger doesn't help you be heard. It robs you of the depth needed to speak in a way others can truly understand. Seneca once likened anger to acid. It damages the container more than anything it's poured on. Each time you let it erupt, you don't just hurt others, you erode your own compassion, self-respect, and clarity. Worse, anger becomes a cycle. The more intensely you react, the more guilty you feel. And instead of repairing, you sink deeper into shame or try to justify the outburst, making everything heavier. But anger isn't the enemy. It's a signal, not a curse. A flare, not a flaw. If you're willing to sit with it, observe it without immediately acting, you'll see it points to something deeper. Maybe a fear of not being heard, a triggered memory, or simply a sense of helplessness you don't know how to name. Stoicism doesn't ask you to suppress emotion. It teaches you to respond at the right time when you've mastered it, not when it's mastering you. You might still feel angry, still want to scream or lash out, but if you pause, take a deep breath and ask, where will this anger take me? The answer becomes painfully clear. It won't lead you to resolution. It only pulls you away from the person you're trying to become. Because in the end, you don't need to shout to be heard. You don't need to slam the table to be respected. You just need to keep your dignity even when your heart is burning. And in that calmness, you don't just find the solution, you find yourself. A version no longer led by anger, but leading it back to its rightful place. With understanding, not blame. With clarity, not fatigue. 9. Letting go of bitterness is a gift you give yourself. Some wounds happened years ago, yet when mentioned, your heart still clenches as if it were just yesterday. A careless word, a quiet betrayal, a promise never kept all lie silently in memory, yet still bleed when someone unknowingly touches them. You think you've moved on, but the truth is, you've only learned to wrap it up, store it in a corner, and occasionally open it, look at it, then shut it again. You call that, I haven't forgotten. But that very act is the burden you carry without knowing. I once held a grudge in my heart. Not a heavy one, but enough to make my heart go cold every time I remembered. I told myself I kept it as a reminder to never be hurt again. But one day I realized I was still living in a past others had long left behind. I was the only one left in that dusty room with old wounds, old emotions, and memories I tormented myself with daily. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "The best revenge is to be unlike him who did the injury." Not because you need to prove you're better, but because you deserve to live freer. Bitterness doesn't make you strong. It makes you heavy. It ties you to a version of the past you no longer are. Each time you recall it, Retell it. Hold on to that feeling you're reopening a wound that should have long healed. Forgiveness doesn't mean you approve of what they did. It doesn't erase the memory. It simply declares, I choose not to let this control my emotions or my life anymore. It's how you reclaim inner space to plant something better. Peace, kindness, clarity, and self-respect. Forgiveness is the decision not to let someone else's mistake continue casting shadows on your brightest days. If someone hurt you, that event already happened. But if you keep carrying bitterness every day, the hurt repeats this time by your own doing. Old wounds don't deserve to be reopened just so you can be labeled the victim. You deserve a different name, the one who moved on, who lightened their heart, who needs no proof, because inner freedom is already the strongest answer. Letting go doesn't mean forgetting. It means clearing the room inside you of things that no longer serve life. And when you do, you don't just feel lighter, you return to owning your life. No longer pulled backward, no longer driven by resentment, but free, peacefully, intentionally. 10. Guide others by living, not by controlling. Have you ever tried to change someone? Tried to show them what you believe is right? Tried to convince them that if they lived differently, things would be better for both of you? You may have done it out of love, because you saw them hurting themselves, because you feared that if you didn't step in, they'd fall off the edge. But eventually, you'll realize a painful truth. No one changes by force, no matter how noble your intent. I fell into that trap once. I thought it was my duty to save someone from their own choices. I used advice, logic, even tears trying to pull them out of the darkness they chose to live in. But the more I tried, the more they resisted. They didn't see me as support, they saw me as control. And it wasn't until I let go that I understood. Sometimes, the kindest thing you can do for someone is to let them walk the road they need to stumble through. Stoics don't believe in forcing people to become better. They believe in the quiet, powerful influence of presence. Lao Tzu once said, "The best leader is the one whose existence is barely known. And when the work is done, the people say, 'We did it ourselves.'" That wisdom applies not only to leaders, but to anyone who shares their life with others. Real influence doesn't come from preaching. It comes from being. When you hold true to your values, others feel it. When you act with consistency, they begin to reflect on themselves. When you choose kindness over control, you plant something quiet but lasting, an invitation, not a command. And that frees you, because trying to control others is not only exhausting, it's an illusion. You can't control someone's behavior, their choices, or their awareness. You can only control how you show up in that relationship. When you stop forcing and start embodying, you're no longer defensive. You're no longer attached to outcomes. You become steady like a pillar, still, but guiding. Instead of asking, "How do I make them change?" ask, "How am I living in a way that creates impact?" And when you shift from control to guidance, you'll witness the miraculous, not because you engineered it, but because you did the one thing you truly have power over, living in alignment with what you believe. And sometimes that alone is enough to change a person, not because you pushed them, but because you lit the way by the way you live. 11. Awareness, control, turning inward. There's a small but crucial moment each time you react to the world. It's the moment between something happens and how you respond. It lasts only a few seconds or maybe just a breath, but within that space, your entire emotional life is decided. And if you don't become aware of that space, you'll live being pulled by emotion instead of choosing your direction. I used to react instantly to everything. A critique made me shrink. A disapproving look made me flare up. A sudden change in plans sent me spiraling. But then I learned a simple model rooted in Stoicism that changed how I live. Awareness, control, turning inward. Acti. 3 small steps to break the emotional loop and begin living as a true adult. The first step is awareness, noticing when emotion begins to rise. You can't stop the current of life, but you can recognize the wave coming. Maybe it's a racing heart, a dry throat, clenched fists, or a voice in your head repeating, "Why would they do that to me?" It's in the moment you realize you're being swept away, that's when you have a chance to change direction. Next comes control, but not over others, or the situation, but over your perspective. The same event can be seen as an insult or a misunderstanding, as a failure or an invitation to grow. Stoic thinking doesn't ask you to be blindly positive, but teaches that emotions don't arise from nowhere. They're created by how you interpret the world, and you have the power to control that story. Lastly, turning inward, which means instead of letting anger, sadness, or anxiety spill outward, you direct that energy inward to transform it. Turning inward isn't avoidance. It's returning to yourself to ask, what do I really need right now? Where is my dignity? How can I respond in a way that doesn't betray myself? When you ask these questions, you stop being the victim of circumstances. You become the guide. Stoicism doesn't create robots. It shapes people who respond to life with depth, not reflex. And within these 3 steps, awareness, control, turning inward, you step out of old patterns and into a new kind of freedom, where you're no longer directed by the world, but deciding how you show up in it. No longer the wave, but the one steering the boat, with eyes open, heart steady, and hands unshaken. 12. Seek solutions, not victory. Many people enter conversations not to understand, but to win. They don't listen to absorb, they listen to strike back. They're not looking for common ground, they're looking for the upper hand. To dominate, to prove, to feel right. But in any relationship, when one person wins and the other loses, both have already lost. Lost connection, lost trust, lost the safe space where both could once be themselves. I used to argue well, but I realized I was only good at breaking things. I won in logic, but lost hearts. I earned fleeting respect, but sacrificed lasting closeness. And I began asking myself, what do I really want? To prove I am right, or to protect a connection that matters? The Stoics understood this well. Epictetus once said, "We have 2 ears and 1 mouth so that we may listen twice as much as we speak." Behind that wisdom is a principle. Listen before you respond, understand before you react, and seek solutions instead of someone to blame. Because in many conflicts, what you really need isn't an apology, it's a path forward, not who's right or wrong, but what do we do now? When you choose to seek solutions, you're not just preserving the relationship, you're building a wiser version of yourself. One not driven by ego, but led by reason and grace. I'm not sharing these thoughts as someone who has fully mastered their emotions, but as someone still practicing every day. There are mornings when I still get angry over a thoughtless comment. There are nights when I still lie awake, hurt by an action that made me feel unseen. But the difference now is that I no longer let emotions linger too long. I observe them, name them, and then choose to respond in a way that aligns with the person I'm striving to become, not the person my fleeting emotions demand I become. Calmness is not a place you arrive and stay forever. It's a state you choose to return to, again and again. A quiet kind of strength, needing no recognition, yet capable of transforming the way you show up in life. And I believe that if each of us takes responsibility for our emotions instead of blaming the outside world, this world will soften little by little, beginning within each of us. If any part of this message resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss future content. This is not a journey of perfection, but a journey back to presence. And sometimes, all it takes is one person's calm to quiet an entire room, even an entire life. See you in the next video.